I'm going to show you how Magnus Carlsen is destroying the Sicilian Najdorf in a very impressive way. And he did it even in the final of the Julius Baer online tournament against Alireza Firouzja. And this game you definitely want to see, as you learn a lot of things, not only how to crush this opening, but how to play in a very efficient manner, how to build up your advantage and convert it. That's what Magnus Carlsen is going to teach us in this video. And if you would like to learn more about exciting games, how to crush the Najdorf, make sure to subscribe, to hit the subscribe button, and you will definitely get to see more videos as well. Now, Magnus Carlsen starts with 1e4. We have the Sicilian as I promised, and it's the open variation, all very standard. a6, this is the starting position, and I don't have to tell you that there are so many different ways of playing this opening as white. So many legal moves have been tried here. It's difficult to say which one is the best. It's also a matter of taste. Developing your bishop is a very logical move. The other bishop can be developed as well. They can go to any square. But the move rook g1, it's a very popular idea. This is how they play the Sicilian Najdorf with white in modern times. And the idea is very simple and straightforward, as white is just preparing to advance its g-pawn to kick the knight away from f6. And later on, as other pawns are going to advance as well, you are able to launch a devastating attack against the black king, hopefully. Now it's black's turn to decide how to respond. Many moves have been played here. e6 or e5, b5 is a nice counter-attacking move, but nowadays h5 to stop that advance of the g-pawn is also very typical and recommended by strong engines. The idea is also simple. You just prevent white from getting that pawn to g4, but at the same time, such a move like h5, it's really weakening, and it also discourages black from ever going to castle kingside. Let's see how play develops. Another drawback of that last move h5 is that white can now place its bishop on g5 without getting ever disturbed by this move h6. So the bishop is absolutely stable there. And here Firouzja deviates from a game Magnus Carlsen played last year against Anish Giri, and the Dutchman played here the move b5. Very interesting move, but Firouzja goes for another typical knight move to overprotect the knight on f6, never allowing white to capture and ruining that pawn formation. So black is always able to recapture. White brings out the bishop to c4, very active square, hopefully looking for ways to challenge the black king later on, but that's for later. First, black got to decide how to continue its development, and especially what is black going to do with that bishop. Like typical Najdorf move is to play here e6 to gain control over some squares on the 5th rank. Maybe the bishop on e6 on c4 is not looking too great, even though in certain cases later on there are possible sacrifices. Maybe that's the reason Firouzja didn't fancy this option, and instead he now played the move g6. So from a Najdorf we are basically switching to a Sicilian dragon setup in which the dark squared bishop is going to be developed to g7. White goes queen d2, bishop g7, castling queenside. Of course, that's the main plan. Castling kingside not allowed, of course, but that was not of Magnus, not on Magnus's mind for sure. We get a sharp position. Queen c7 played, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes back to b3, and black consciously delays the decision of castling kingside by playing first the move b5, so that b4 could be an idea to attack the knight, and well, that could mean that the pawn on e4 will lack enough defender. So here another interesting moment. Magnus says, well, I will overprotect the pawn, and how to do that? Well, he goes for rook g2 e1. The rook is no longer needed on g1. The idea was to play g4, but since black has prevented it and weakened its kingside, the rook is now better placed in the center, and who knows, maybe there are ideas to open up the e-file at some point, and the rook can exert pressure against that pawn on e7 or even the black king. Depending on what black is going to do, I think a move like bishop b7 could be considered here, but Firouzja goes for castling kingside. Understandable. And Magnus played a move f4 with ideas to go either e5 at the right moment or maybe play f5. Typical move often seen in the Sicilian Najdorf, but I want to point out that Magnus misses a very interesting shot, as he could have played knight to d5, guys, and that's an attack on the queen. If you do take the knight, the bishop recaptures, hitting the rook on a8. If the rook goes away, now the pawn on e7 is hanging. So that is a serious problem. It seems to me that white is winning material. Let's take it back one move. Black is not obliged to take, but gotta do something about that queen. If the queen goes back to d8 in order to protect the pawn on e7, well, there is knight c6 with a typical knight fork. Hitting the queen on d8 as well as the pawn on e7, white is going to win big material. And this shows you why black should have better played first the move bishop b7 in order to cover the c6 square. This is a very typical motive in the Sicilian Najdorf. So keep that in mind, that this is something you don't want to allow. Missed opportunity, but still white's position looks very promising after the move f4. Black played here the move knight c5 with the idea to eliminate the bishop on b3 whenever it's needed. But the drawback is that white will now take with his bishop on f6 to whip off that knight. If you do recapture with the bishop, now the knight will come into d5, and whatever you do, queen is under threat, queen gotta go away. White's gonna take on f6, and black will be forced to recapture with the e-pawn, and that really weakens the pawn on d6. Well, in fact, we get to see something very similar in the game, as black decides not to take back with the bishop, but instead recaptures with the pawn. And this pawn on d6, it's a serious weakness, but is white interested in winning that pawn? Well, Magnus has different ideas. He played here the move f5, and I think this is a fantastic idea. Also a very nice positional concept, as you're boxing in both these bishops. They're restricted by that pawn on f5. Black is never able to play f5 himself anytime soon. What should black do? That's the question. F takes g6 is an idea, as the pawn on f7 is pinned. Of course, black can still consider taking on b3 anytime. Should you close the position with a move like g5? Well, that's very ugly. This bishop is very bad. The knight will come into d5. White has an overwhelming advantage. Don't do that. If you play a move like bishop b7, well, f takes g6 is there. F takes g6 recapture, not allowed because of the bishop on b3. If you recapture on if you capture on b3 first and white recaptures, the pawn should be recaptured, but then the e6 square is a weakness. Now the bishop is missing on c8 to guard that e6 square. So black has a lot of problems. Played here the move king h7, getting out of that diagonal, so the pawn can always be recaptured. And at the same time, black is threatening. Simple move with bishop h6, winning the queen. Of course, white's not going to fall for that. Played king b1, very useful move, stepping out of that diagonal for the bishop. Bishop goes now to b7, and here white played the move knight d5. Excellent move. If you do take on d5, the bishop is going to recapture, and black's knight on c5 is not able to eliminate that bishop any longer. White has an overwhelming dominant position, with plans of bringing up the pawns in order to open up the files. Maybe later on the rook and the queen, they will swing over to that other side of the board in order to attack the king. I fail to see any counterplay for black. So what black did in the game is take the bishop first. If you take on c7, well, there's knight takes d2. Keep it simple. That's Magnus, his trademark style. He recaptures with the a-pawn, and look at these knights. They are dominating the center. They are absolutely superior to the bishops, especially the bishop on g7 looks really bad. Bishop takes d5 was played, and now you can just recapture on d5 if you want. But even stronger is to insert this intermediate move f takes g6 with check. Black recaptured, and now e takes d5, and by undoubling the pawns on the f-file, white has managed to create a huge hole on e6, which is the ideal square for the knight to go to. Rook f e8, anticipating a possible knight fork. So knight e6 is there, only attacking the queen, not the rook on f8. Queen goes to f7, and this knight, it's just paralyzing black's position. It means that all black's pieces are really passive, and white has a simple plan of bringing its major pieces into the game, open up the king side in order to exploit that vulnerable king. And this knight on e6 can never be challenged by a pawn or another piece. I mean, rook takes e6 is just a radical way of eliminating that octopus on e6, but it's something which is really bad. What should white do? I think the logical move would be queen f4, just to keep it simple. But Magnus wants to play it in a very enterprising style. Play the move g4, also very good. After h takes g4, the idea is to get the rook involved, and you're going to regain the pawn on g4, opening up the files towards the king. One main idea, of course, is that f5 to attack the rook and protect the pawn on g4 is met by knight g5, and black is losing its queen because of the knight fork. So therefore, black started with bishop h6 to attack the queen. The queen goes to f2, very simple move. Now black played the move f5, but rook takes g4 can be played anyway, because f takes g4 is not possible as the queen on f7 is hanging. Therefore, black, fighting for the initiative, played here the move queen a7. The queen comes to the other side of the board, offering the exchange of queens. Also, the rook is hanging. What should white do about it? You don't want to lose material. You may just exchange queens, but that's a pity, because we had a big plan of trying to play for an attack against the black king. So therefore, Magnus's move is much better. He goes for rook to d4, avoiding the exchange of queens and securing that rook, which is no longer hanging. Black played the move a5, and guys, let's have a look at this position. If you're careless, if you're too slow, black is going to push that pawn, either with the idea to take on b3 or launch the pawn to a3 with the idea to open up the a file with plans of delivering checkmate. But it's white's turn first, and Magnus brings the queen into action. It's on h4 now, and if black continues with the aforementioned plan of a4, then the main idea is to sacrifice the queen on h6, and it's a beautiful mating pattern of rook and knight. The king can't go anywhere. It's checkmated on the h file. So the black queen goes back to e7, offering the exchange of queens. And now the queen sacrifice, of course, no longer works, because the queen is also covering the h4 square. So white keeps queens on the board. Queen h3, very simple, efficient way of playing. Queen f6 played, rook h4. That was the main idea, to set up a battery of two major pieces, hitting the bishop. G5 played, rook h5, very simple move with the idea of taking on g5 next. The bishop is pinned, so therefore it's not a good defender. And white is also planning to bring another rook into the attack, to attack the pawn on f5. g4 played to attack the queen. Now the queen goes to d3 with the threat of taking the pawn on f5. Even the pawn on b5 can be considered, but frankly, I don't think a top player is looking at that pawn on b5. You're looking at the black king, which is lacking support now. King g6, hitting the rook. The rook is almost trapped, cannot go anywhere. The king is also defending the pawn, but what is white's idea? This is very important. Well, for Magnus, this is just a very simple exercise. He played rook to f1, intensifying the pressure on that f5 square, which is now 3 times attacked. Cannot be defended by any other piece. The only move is king takes h5. But now if the rook takes f5, it's a double attack. White is winning the queen. Black is forced to give it up. Queen takes f5. Queen takes f5. The only square for the king is h4. But now queen f2. We keep on giving checks. The king can't run away because of queen g3 with checkmate. So king goes instead to h5. And now there's not an immediate win. And materially speaking, things are not too bad for black. It's a queen and a pawn versus 2 rooks. But still, this knight is restricting the mobility of the black rooks. They are really bad. Black's king is wide open. We make it even more open with the next move, h3. If you take the pawn, the plan is to go queen g3. Not that you're winning instantly, but you want to take the pawn on h3. If the king goes to the g file, you come back to g3 and win the pawn on d6 as well. This position is really falling apart. In the game, something similar happened after rook g8. Pawn on g4 was captured. Black brought another rook closer to its king to try to defend against potential threats. But after queen h2 check, the king gotta go away, or you block it with the rook. Then the pawn on d6 is hanging. And now white no longer has to play for mate. It can also just try to bring up its d pawn, its passed pawn, which is creating more problems for black. Black went for a4, hoping that after a takes b3, rook h1, there is a mating pattern against the white king, but this is way too slow because white starts with a check, queen e5, king goes to g6, queen to g3, double attack, king h5, queen f3, another check, king to g6, and I like this move queen f3 so much because it also deprives the black rook from coming to h1. Now after the move d6, you're running with your pawn and at the same time you're attacking the other rook. Fantastic coordination by Magnus. After rook a7 trying to stop the pawn, the queen goes to d3 with check, king goes away, and now it's the move d7 and there's nothing you can do against the promotion of the d-pawn. Well, rook h1 was played, it's a check. After king a2, black resigned. There's only one more check. A takes b3, king takes b3. The checks are over. And the only way to stop the promotion of the d-pawn is to give up the rook. But such position with a queen versus a rook against an open king is absolutely hopeless. So I thought this game was just very impressive and may give you new ideas how to crush the Sicilian Najdorf. Do you like this video? Give it a like. Hit the subscribe button. And definitely soon more interesting videos how to crush this very popular opening.